So I wanted to talk about what each house represents in astrology. Now, before we get into it, I wanted to address a question that I see a lot, which is each house ruled by the zodiac sign in numerical order? So what I mean by that is the first house literally ruled by Aries? Is the second house ruled by Taurus? Is the third house ruled by Gemini, and so forth? So the short answer is no, unless you literally have an Aries first house or a Taurus second house or Gemini third and so forth. But the kind of longer answer is that even though the signs do not literally rule over the houses in terms of, like I said, in numerical order innately, unless you again have an Aries first or a second, the zodiac signs do share certain themes and symbolism with the houses that match their numerical order. So I'll give an example. When we think about the fourth house rules over our emotional wellness, our emotional expression, our family dynamics. It rules over motherhood. It rules over babies and infants. It rules over domestic matters, our personal lives, our private lives. So when you think about what the fourth house represents, does a certain zodiac sign come to mind? And is it Cancer? So yes, the zodiac signs do share certain themes and symbolism with the houses, but they don't literally rule over the houses, and the houses do represent more than just the symbolism of the sign that corresponds in numerical order. Not to mention, depending on what sign literally rules over, like your fourth house, that will heavily change the dynamic. So the themes do remain, but how those themes are expressed is going to be very different when it comes to what sign is ruling over what house. So I hope that made sense. Okay, so let's get into it. So we're gonna start in order. We're gonna go with the first house. So the first house is a very primitive house. It's very primal. It rules over our natural instincts, and this includes our reactions, our first impressions. It's kind of like an immediate judgment type house because there's such an evolutionary foundation to the house. So it also rules over our survival skills, our willpower, our strength, our determination. It rules over our motives, what pushes us in life, what drives us. And that said, because it is a very hormonal house, it also rules over our aggression. In a lot of cases, it also rules over our physical prowess, our physical body. Now, keep in mind, and we'll get to this, the sixth house also rules over the body in certain ways, like our health, but the first house rules over our body as well, especially in terms of our body's function, what our body looks like. So the first house has a lot to do with appearance as well. So the first house it's very much of the physical flesh in that way. I almost forgot to mention too, the first house also rules over competition, which kind of goes back to drive, aggression. So the first house also shows like our fight, our flight as well. Now we'll get to the second house. The second house rules over our values. It rules over, in a lot of cases, our priorities in life, the things that we believe in, the things that we hold to be true to us. And values also extends to not just like our personal values, but our material values. And this can be our actual physical possessions, and also possessions in kind of a more abstract sense. So even the people that we hold very dear to us. There's a really interesting trend and pattern I've noticed, and maybe I'll get into this in a separate video, where a lot of criminals that I've studied, like famous notorious criminals, have Neptune in the second. Neptune being a very elusive, foggy, slippery planet where there's not many boundaries. So my interpretation of that with people who have Neptune, and this is not going to be everybody, so don't worry. If you have Neptune in the second, do not worry. This doesn't mean you're a bad person. It's just all how things manifest and express themselves. But I interpret this as people who don't respect other people's autonomy, like the unfavorable expression, not everybody with Neptune the second, but people who struggle accepting other people as their own individual autonomous people, and they perceive people as possessions that they can kind of use and dispose of. So that's a trend I've seen amongst criminals, and very extreme, unfavorable, examples of how that placement can manifest. Again, do not worry if you have Neptune the second. That does not mean that is going to be who you are. I just thought that was an interesting way to kind of explain how the second house deals in possessions and values, but not just the material and not just the things that we believe in, but also the people in our lives and how we treat them, how we respect them, how we afford them autonomy. So anyway, And in dealing in material objects, the second house also rules over our finances, specifically our earned finances. So the money that we earn from work, basically. And, depending on what's ruling over the second house, it shows how we make our money, where our money can come from. Now, in dealing with money, which in our capitalist society is how we are validated for our worth as human beings, because in a capitalist society, our self-worth is often associated with our ability to be productive, which obviously between you and I, that's not true. That's a really unfortunate expression of the society we live in. But the second house also has a lot to do with our feelings of self-worth, our self-esteem. So it's kind of like, how worthy of an individual do you feel, and where do you place your worth as a person? Let's get to the third house. So the third house is the house of cognitive framework. It's the house of intelligence, and it deals in communication. So it's how we process information, and it's how we relay information. So whatever sign is ruling over, whatever placements are inside, this can show how, how intelligent we are and where our intelligence comes from. It reminds me of, it's like if you put a fish on land, it's gonna fail. Of course, a fish on land is not gonna thrive because it belongs in the water. So it's kind of one of those things too, where it's like, what type of intelligence do you have? How can you best utilize it? How can you best nurture it? The third house also deals in our curiosities, our interests, the things that we find very intriguing. Curiosity killed the cat. That's very much the third house. And the third house also deals in our mental health, in dealing with our cognitive framework and our brain power. Now, independent of how the third house relates to us in our brain and our body, it also deals in lower level education. So think of it like pre-K through high school. It also deals in our local community members. So our neighbors, peers, our peer relationships are very much a part of the third house, which kind of goes back to like lower level education, the people that you go to school around, the people you grow up around. It rules over our cousins, our siblings, again, like those peer connections, even in family. It also rules over automobiles and short distance travel, so going to a neighboring town, for example, and short-term travel as well, so like a weekend getaway nearby, a staycation as they call it. And the third house also rules over technology. Now keep in mind, we'll get to another house that rules over technology too, the 11th house. Third house is more so technology that has to do with media, news station, radio, media, TV. So that's very, cell phones, computers, email, that's very much the third house in terms of technology that it represents. Now, the third house also deals with reading, writing, any type of skill that requires like the hands. So even music can be kind of lumped into that, playing instruments. That's another one that the third house does bode very well with. Public speaking, singing, something that requires the voice. So the third house, all about communication. That includes how we utilize our voice as an instrument in life as well. All right, let's get to the fourth house, which I briefly kind of touched on in my little example earlier. So the fourth house rules over our emotional expression. How do we express our emotions? What type of emotions are we prone to feeling? How do we convey those emotions? How do we process other people's emotions? Do we feel competent? Are we kind of insecure? Do we feel threatened by other people's emotions? The fourth house also has to do with our family dynamics and our upbringing. What kind of household were you raised in? And there's emphasis on mother and like the matriarch side of your family. So feminine figures are very prominent when it comes to the fourth house. So a lot of the times this can show more so your relationship with your mother, but depending on what sign is involved or what placements are in it, like if it's Capricorn, for example, which in my opinion rules over father, father can still have a lot of sway when it comes to the energy in the fourth house. Now, in dealing with family dynamics, the fourth house also represents babies, infants, newborns, little tiny babies. It represents fertility. It deals in the feminine expression. So the fourth house is a really good spot if you're looking at your chart to kind of make certain predictions regarding to measure your fertility, and in a lot of cases to see, like, for example, how many pregnancies you might have. Now, there's other houses that can tie into that, like 5th and 8th, but I think the fourth house is really good at measuring as well what type of family dynamic you want to have in adulthood. And in a lot of cases, that can tie into marriage as well. Now, just a little tip too, for anyone who's really interested in the topic of fertility, pregnancy, and children in astrology, in the birth chart, I did make a video on that. So it is available on my page for those of you who want to know more about that topic. Okay, speaking of children, let's get to the 5th house. So the 5th house actually rules over children like toddlers. And in ruling over children, it deals in youthfulness, it deals in creativity, it deals in self-expression, who you are in the world and how you like to express yourself, which includes personality. The 5th house has a lot to do with personality, and it also has a lot to do with, similar to the 1st house, the way we look, but this is more so going to be clothing, style, aesthetics. So so it's not so much literally your body. We can't really help what we look like in that respect, but how you choose to adorn yourself and present yourself to the world, which can also include like what kind of aesthetics, I call it like genre, what kind of genre of style you really enjoy to employ into your daily life. Now, in terms of creativity, it also rules over pastimes, hobbies, specifically hobbies and pastimes though that have to do with like certain performances, artistic endeavors. So for example, theater, performing in that regard, art, painting, drawing, even music and singing, similar to like the 3rd house. Creative expressions just bode very well in the 5th house. Now, aside from the creative aspect and the arts and the performance, hobbies, pastimes, also games. The 5th house does great with game playing. Speaking of game playing, romance. The 5th house has a lot to do with romance, but specifically the lighthearted, more flirty part of romance, like the lusty, attraction-based part of romance. So, love at first sight, bedroom behavior, that can play a big role into the 5th house. Dating, going on like actual dates. So the romantic part that is actually like fun, whereas we'll get to it with the 7th house, that's relationships. But the 5th house is more so that kind of flirty, fun, the honeymoon phases of our relationships, our romantic relationships. So this can show the type of people you attract, the type of people you're attracted to. And in that respect as well, the 5th house can show how you gain attention. So similar to the 2nd, it can have a little bit of say in our self-esteem as well. How validated we feel by the world. How do you validate yourself, which can again tie in to that self-expression. Okay, so let's get into the 6th house. The 6th house, oh gosh, it's a little bit of a dull house in terms of the themes that it represents and how it expresses in our lives. So the 6th house has to do with our health, our actual physical body in that respect, the function of our body. So depending on what's placed inside of it, what sign is ruling over it, that can say a lot about the type of ailments that we have. If we have any illnesses or diseases or conditions or physical limitations, that's really important in the 6th house. Now, aside from health, the 6th house also has to do with our responsibilities, our obligations. This includes professional obligations as well. So your work life, you can find out a lot about your work life, especially your work schedule, the actual time that you work, and how flexible is your schedule, who do you report to. All of that information can be found in your 6th house. And it also has to do with like the service that we provide the world. How do we feel of service? How do we feel productive? It's a need to be needed. So this house also has a lot to do with the type of activities we engage in that we feel we can be best of service to other people, if that makes sense. I know that was a little bit wordy. Now, in terms of responsibilities, this also includes those day-to-day kind of annoying affairs we have to tend to. So aside from work, errands, chores, doctor appointments in general, going to get the oil changed in your car, like all of those mundane and minute little things, that's how the 6th house, that's all about the 6th house. It's just a matter of upkeeping and, undergoing routine maintenance in our daily lives. So, and that's the thing, even though the 6th house is boring, it's so important to our daily sense of health and happiness and joy. In a lot of ways, it's almost like the 6th house is like the telltale sign of how we're doing in life, because of how much serious stuff resides inside of it. And if you don't have a grasp on your daily life and your routine and your schedule, everything else can kind of fall to the wayside. Okay, we're halfway there. So let's talk about the seventh house. The seventh house rules over our relationships, specifically our one-on-one relationships. So whereas the third house and the 11th house are more group settings, third being more local, and 11th being a little bit broader, kind of like humanity as a whole. The seventh house is our intimate, personal, one-on-one connections. And this extends to our our marital partner, our spouse. That's a big one here. It also includes like certain business affiliates, like your relationship with your boss, for example, your business partner. Any like one-on-one connection can be found here. And it is my personal theory that the seventh house also represents our parents' relationship with one another. So their connection to each other. And the reason I feel this way, aside from studying charts and kind of seeing how the seventh house in terms of the parents' connection reflects in that person's life, the seventh house dealing with relationships, in a lot of cases, growing up, our first understanding of what a relationship is and how two people communicate and collaborate is our parents. So that's why I personally feel that your parents' connection is found in the seventh house. But anyway, that said, the seventh house is all about collaboration, cooperation. How well do you fare in a one-on-one connection? How comfortable are you sharing? Remember, the seventh house opposes the first. The first is very primitive. It's me, me, me. It's getting your needs met. The seventh house is figuring out how to meet your needs while still maintaining a relationship with another person. So how do you share? How do you collaborate? How do you cooperate? Now, aside from dealing in relationships, the seventh house in a lot of cases can deal in legal affairs, legal commitment in general, because again, it does tie back into relationships, your ability to commit to another person. But here you can also see like advocacy, a need for justice, caring about certain issues and wanting to bring truth to light, advocating on behalf of other people. So you can also see law and government affairs here as well. And keep in mind, there are other houses that tie into those themes, but the seventh house is significant in that regard as well. Okay, the eighth house. This is a notorious house. It gets a lot of flack, or not necessarily flack, but I think a lot of people are kind of scared of the eighth house. So the eighth house deals in the life cycle. That means birth to death. The circle of life. It's a little bit similar to the first house in that way, in that there is kind of like a primitive undertone to the eighth house, because it does deal also in bodily functions. You get what I'm saying there? It deals in sexuality. So it also deals in, again, the life cycle, like giving birth, for example. So it does deal in some of those more primitive parts of life where it's kind of like an evolutionary drive. So the eighth house is really kind of nitty gritty in that way. And in dealing with death, I think people, they get very scared, obviously, of that existential dread and threat. But a lot of the times that death is metaphorical. It usually just notes an intense transformation, which can also pertain to like a rehabilitation of sort. So the eighth house can kind of show in some cases like our demons, our addictions, the things that afflict us in life. So undergoing a state of rehabilitation to heal and mend those things, you can definitely see that in the eighth house. So that theme of death is not always literal. A lot of the times, I would say most of the times, it is a metaphorical sense of death. Now that said, in dealing with like transformation and stuff, the eighth house is very closely tied to spirituality and the spiritual realm and the underworld, or you can call it like, the other side. So people who have passed, and that can include your connection to your ancestors, the people in your family lineage who no longer exist in the material, but still very much exist in your life karmically. And that said, the eighth house has to do with karmic debts, the things that we owe others and what is owed to us. So the eighth house opposes the second. The second house deals in finances and earned wealth. The eighth house deals in wealth and finances that we did not actively earn in this lifetime. So what I mean by that is the eighth house, it's not like you can go off to work and earn what the eighth house has to give you. It's stuff that we are owed from a past life, or things that we are owed from indirect and even at times challenging circumstances, like an inheritance. So money that comes to you through a roundabout way. This could even note money that comes to you from the government. This could note money that comes to you from like a lawsuit, so winning a lawsuit. There's a lot of ways that money can be routed to you that doesn't involve you literally going to work and actively working for that money. So that's the stark difference between the 2nd and the 8th house. So let's talk about the 9th house. The 9th house deals in education and travel primarily. It represents things that are different than us, things that are outside of our comfort zone. So a lot of the times the 9th house has to do with culture, religion, belief systems, politics. It's the topics in life that separate all of us, but at the same respect, bring us together. So the 9th house also shows a strong desire for knowledge and mental expansion. Remember, it does oppose the 3rd house. So whereas the 3rd house is more lower level education, which can, in a lot of cases, just note like the rules of life, I don't want to use the word indoctrination because that's a little dramatic, but lower level education is a little bit sanitized, right? The 9th house is higher education. It's college, it's university, and beyond. The 9th house is like going to college for a year and taking time off to go backpacking through Europe. That is so 9th house energy. So it's knowledge that we gain from higher education, also life experience, maturity. The 9th house represents wisdom in a lot of cases and how we earn that wisdom. Now, the 9th house is really complicated. It's not all sunshine and rainbows. Because there is a sense of difference, there's also a sense of distance. So depending on what's in the 9th house and the sign ruling over, it can show a part of your life that you feel distance from. Especially if there's like moon placed there, it can note a distance from family or mother, or Saturn or Cap, a distance from father. So there's a lot of ways, those are just kind of generalized examples. There's a lot of ways that can manifest that distance and that difference. So the 9th house can also be very isolating in a lot of ways. So even though it represents abundance, like if you have Venus in the 9th, for example, or Taurus, that could note financial abundance, there's still a sense of separation and distance. So depending on what's going on and what's in aspect, that's really going to be the telltale sign of what exactly is going on. So you do need the full picture. Now, in dealing with kind of like that sense of absence, the 9th house can be very lonely, which is usually what fuels that need for knowledge and that absorption of wisdom and spiritual discovery. So the 9th house also deals in spirituality and religion as well, and organized groups of thought too. So the 9th house can be kind of nihilistic at times, especially if there's like sun in 9th, that person might struggle feeling quite nihilistic or, feeling a little bit of existential dread. The 9th house can be kind of risky in that way too, because if you're not careful, you can border into depression, apathy, some of those more unfavorable expressions of being. So that's kind of the tricky duality of the 9th house. It's a great house for what it represents, but it is all about your perspective and how you can navigate it, which makes sense because the 9th house also does rule over our general perspective on life, the information we have, the knowledge we have, our ability to share that knowledge with other people, our optimism. Now the 9th house too, in a more fun way, can represent certain risks that we take. It can represent gambling. It can also represent addiction in some cases. There's an abundant energy here. So depending on what's placed inside, that can note having a little too much of something. Okay, now we'll get to the 10th house. Where to start with the 10th? The 10th house is a very, very powerful house. So if you are a Placidus user, the 10th house is where the midheaven is. It's the 10th house cusp. So that's what makes, especially in Placidus, the 10th house just really exceptional. Now the 10th house shows our karmic legacy. It really doesn't get any more than that. It shows our karmic legacy. It shows how we influence other people. It shows our effect on others. Think of it too almost like a butterfly effect. It shows how our life can greatly impact the lives of the people around us. It shows our achievements, our milestones, what we can accomplish against the limitations placed upon us, how we defy the odds, how we become statistical anomalies even. It shows our greatest wins, but you need that spectrum. It also shows in a lot of cases too, our greatest losses. It shows, trial and error. Whatever is placed into the 10th house, the 10th house has the power to take that placement, take that sign, and express it to its fullest potential. That's what makes the 10th house so powerful. is it can take anything placed inside of it and it will really, really strengthen it. It will stretch it as far as it goes. It will inflate it as much as possible. It brings out the absolute best, but in the same respect, it can bring out, the worst. It's all going to depend on what else is going on in the chart, and of course, free will as always. Another kind of morbid example that I have is there's a lot of really powerful people out there that have Uranus in the 10th, and their legacies are quite uncomfortable and disturbing, to say the least. Obviously, that is not everybody with Uranus in the 10th. So don't worry if you have Uranus in the 10th, you're fine. You can leave behind a miraculous legacy. But there are certain people in society, historical figures, a lot of them controversial, basically, is what I'm saying. There's a lot of controversial figures in society that have Uranus in the 10th. And sometimes this is controversial in kind of a good way. Like it shakes up the status quo. So that's just an example of what I mean when I say, in terms of legacy and taking something as far as it can go, you put a strong planet like Uranus in the 10th and you can really leave behind a crazy, unconventional legacy. Now, remember, the 10th house does oppose the 4th. So the 4th house rules over our personal life. The 10th house rules over our professional life. So the 10th and the 6th both have a lot of say in our career and our undertaking, and that's because the 10th house, like I said, anything placed in there, you can take it to the fullest extent. That's where your accomplishments are, your achievement. And the 10th house, and also opposing the 4th, which is more matriarch, mother, the 10th house can represent father and, patriarch energy, authority figures, masculine figures, the teachers in our lives, the mentors that we have. So that's where the differences between 4th and 10th really lie. Okay, so let's get to the 11th house, which actually has a lot in common with the 10th house in some ways. So we'll start with what it does not have in common. The 10th house rules over friendships, it rules over affiliates, it rules over the communities and the groups that we are involved in. The 11th house is also, did I say 11th? I meant 11th if I didn't. The 11th house is also very philanthropic. It deals in charity, it deals in social welfare, it deals in like programs that, support social welfare. It deals in humanity, it deals in global affairs, the things that affect all of us. And in that respect too, it deals in climate, it deals in nature, it deals in the weather, it deals in natural disasters. It also deals in politics and government as well, similar to 7th. And I forgot to mention this too, but the 9th house also has a lot to do with government. So these houses in general kind of work together in that respect. So the 11th house has to do with like political affiliates as well, because these are the people that make the laws that affect humanity. So that's where that becomes relevant. And the 11th house represents in a lot of cases too, liberation, freedom, rebellion. It's a very unconventional house. It's also very forward thinking. It's all about social progress. So the 11th house also deals in science, medicine, technology. Now the technology is a little different than that 3rd house technology. The 11th house is kind of like what I was saying, more science, experiments, biology, technology that actually isn't just being used to communicate a message the way the 3rd house is, but technology that is being used to improve the lives of individuals on like a global mass scale. So it's not just about relaying information, it's about like improving quality of life. I think that's the main difference here. Now, this is where the 11th house and the 10th house kind of have some similarities. The 11th house, similar to 10th, can also kind of show our public role, our social role, how we help others, and that can definitely tie into our career depending on what you choose to go into. And the 11th house can also show our colleagues. So those are some ways that it's similar to the 10th. Now, the 11th house, whereas the 10th is more so like achievements that we set out to accomplish and do, the 11th house is very random, it's very abrupt, it's shocking, it's unexpected. These are miracles that can come into our life that we did not see coming. These are things that enter our lives out of left field that prove to be miraculous and extremely helpful. These are the wishes that we have that we're not really sure if they're going to come true. Maybe they're too lofty. So the 11th house rules over wishes, it rules over miracles, it rules over dreams come true. So it's a very, very special house in that respect. Okay, last house here, the 12th house. Probably, in my opinion, the most interesting house. The 12th house, in short, represents all things that are hidden and under the surface. It represents secrets, it represents mysteries, it represents phenomena. for example, like ghosts, it's similar to the 8th, it represents spirituality, similar to the 9th, it represents religion. So it represents education and information that is transcendent of the material. So the thing about the 12th house is it doesn't fare very well in the material. It's not concerned with the material. It's concerned with the transcendence of material. It doesn't want to just think and consider about the world we're living in here and now, the fleshiness. It wants to think about something so much higher and something that we can't touch and we can't see, but we can feel. So the 12th house also has a lot to do with our intuition, which I did forget to mention. So does the 4th house. The 4th and 12th have some intersecting qualities in that way, where the 4th house can also deal in secrets. The difference being secrets are more likely to come to light in the 4th because, the 4th kind of like illuminates. The 12th house is very murky. It's very foggy. Sometimes a secret's going to stay a secret. Sometimes a mystery's never going to get solved. That's kind of the frustrating thing about the 12th house is you have to find the clarity and the closure within yourself. You can't depend on external answers or validation. You have to just have the faith within yourself and within life. Faith plays a really big role in navigating the 12th house. Now, the other thing about the 12th house that makes it really tricky is the 12th house can show a severe point of vulnerability. This is an area where, again, because it's so foggy, we might struggle to see clearly. So, for example, if you have Venus in the 12th, that could note kind of a foggy love life. It might take a little bit of time to find someone who's right for you. The 12th house can also kind of strip away boundaries. There's not really, there's really no limitations, which is also what can make it really frustrating, depending on what's placed inside the 12th house. So in going back to like a point of vulnerability, the 12th house rules over hospitals, it rules over like rehabilitation institutions, it rules over charities, it rules over, like actual charitable foundations, which similar to the 11th house in that way. 11th and 12th are both very charitable. It's just that the 11th house is more so the people that are like working to improve the lives of others, whereas the 12th house is more so the people that are actually being helped. So the 12th house also rules over, in a lot of cases, prison. Any community or institution where there is a vulnerable population of people, and also people that might be kind of at the will of others. That's where that kind of like a lack, in an ironic sense, a lack of limitation comes in. Even though you yourself personally are limited, the external events that are happening to you are not. So there's potential here for a lot of extreme circumstances that can take place in your life, basically. I really don't have a more eloquent or concise way to word it, so I apologize, but hopefully you understand what I'm saying. Now, the thing is, the 12th house isn't also scary. The benefit of the 12th house is it does give you the ability to master your material environment and transcend. So even though the 12th house can show a foggy area in our lives, it does show the ability to heal that area and overcome it. And once you kind of start to confront what you cannot readily see, and you start to kind of acknowledge its presence with the faith that you have, even though, maybe you don't know for sure, but you have an inkling, so you start to kind of confront it. Once you start to confront some of those things in your life, that's when so much will open up for you. So like going back to that Venus example, even though your romantic life and your romantic development can be difficult, confronting that and healing it and working to place boundaries, because remember, it's kind of limitless. So you need to place the boundaries. You need to find your limit. Once you do that, you can go on to have the fairy tale romance that you desire. That's the great thing about the 12th house, is it's also very romantic. It's very creative based. It deals in like the poets, the painters, the dreamers, the romantics. There's such a like lofty energy to this house that makes it so you can achieve your dreams and you can get the things you desire and want. You just have to have the faith and the trust and the patience, and you need to kind of set up healthy boundaries along the way. Okay, so hopefully that all made sense, and I'm sure as we went along, you could kind of see the correspondence between those zodiac signs and those houses, both in numerical order. So again, even though like those signs, like Aries zodiac sign doesn't literally rule the first, unless you have an Aries first, they do share certain themes and symbolism. And of course, the houses do represent much more. but that those intersecting qualities are definitely there. So let me know what you think. Let me know if you resonate with this video. Share whatever your heart desires in the comments. Thank you so much for watching. I do have my contact information in the description for anyone who's interested in booking a reading. I do natal, I do transit, I do love, I do synastry, composite. I offer a lot. I will have my website up soon, so I'll link that as well. And yeah, thank you very much, and feel free to like, subscribe, and comment if you feel so inclined. Mwah!